Melchim Bet, 2 Kings. After Achav's death, Moab rebelled against Israel. When Achaziah fell through the lattice window in his upper room in Shimron and lay injured, he sent messengers and said to them, "Go, consult Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, and ask whether I should recover from this injury." But the angel of Adonai said to Eliyahu from Tishbe, "Get up and intercept the messengers of the king of Shimron, and ask them, is it because there's no God in Israel that you're on your way to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore Adonai says, you will never leave the bed you're lying on. You will certainly die." Then Eliyahu left. The messengers returned to Achaziah, and he asked them, "Why have you come back?" They answered, "A man came to meet us. He told us to go and return to the king who sent us and tell him, here is what Adonai says. Is it because there is no God in Israel that you are sending to consult Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore you will never leave the bed you are lying on. You will certainly die." He asked them, "The man who came to meet you and told you these things, what kind of man was he? Was he a hairy man?" They answered him, "With a leather belt around his waist." He said, "It was Eliyahu from Tishbe." Then the king sent a commander of 50 to Eliyahu, together with his 50 men. Eliyahu was sitting on top of a hill. The commander climbed up to him and said, "Man of God, the king says to come down." Eliyahu answered the commander of 50, "If I am in fact a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and burn you up, along with your 50 men." Fire came down from heaven and burned them up, and his 50 men. The king sent another commander of 50, together with his 50 men. He said to him, "Man of God, the king says, come down immediately." Eliyahu answered them, "If I am in fact a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and burn you up, along with your 50 men." Fire came down from heaven and burned him up, and his 50 men. The king sent a third commander of 50, with his 50 men. The third commander of 50 climbed up, approached Eliyahu, and fell on his knees before him. He pleaded with him, "Man of God, please, have some regard for my life, the lives of the 50 servants of yours. I know that fire came down from heaven and burned up the 2 other commanders with their 50 men, but now have some regard for my life." The angel of Adonai said to Eliyahu, "Go down with him, don't be afraid of him." So he got up and went down with him to the king. Eliyahu said to the king, "Here is what Adonai says. You sent messengers to consult Beelzebub, the king of Ekron. It is because there's no God in Israel you can consult. Therefore you will never leave the bed you are lying on. You will certainly die." So he died, in keeping with the word of Adonai spoken through Eliyahu. Joram began to rule in place of him during the 2nd year of Joram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Yehuda, because he had no son. Other activities of Achaziah are recorded in the annals of the kings of Israel. The time came for Adonai to take Eliyahu up to heaven in a whirlwind. Eliyahu and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal, when Eliyahu said to Elisha, "Please wait here, because Adonai has sent me all the way to Baal." But Elisha said, "As Adonai lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Baal. The guild prophets of Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that Adonai is taking your master away from you today?" "Yes, I know," he answered. "Say no more." Eliyahu said to him, "Elisha, please wait here, because Adonai has sent me to Jericho." He replied, "As Adonai lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. The guild prophets of Jericho approached Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that Adonai is taking your master away from you today?" "Yes, I know." He answered, "Say no more." Eliyahu said to him, "Please, wait here, because Adonai has sent me to the Yarden." He replied, "As Adonai lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 of the guild prophets went and stood watching from a distance, while they stood by the Yarden. Then Eliyahu took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided itself to the left and to the right, so that they crossed on dry ground. After they had crossed, Eliyahu said to Elisha, "Tell me what I can do for you before I am taken away from you." Elisha said, "Please, let a double share of your spirit be on me." He replied, "You have requested a hard thing. Nevertheless, if you see me when I am taken from you, you will get what you asked for, but if not, you won't." Suddenly, as they were walking on and talking, there appeared a fiery chariot with horses of fire, and it was separated the two of them from each other. Eliyahu went up into the heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw it and cried out, "My father, my father! The chariots of the horsemen of Israel!" Then he lost sight of him. Seizing his clothes, he tore them in half. Then he picked up Eliyahu's cloak, which had fallen off of him. Standing on the bank of the Yarden, he took the cloak that had fallen off of Eliyahu, struck the water, and said, "Where is Adonai, the God of Eliyahu?" But when he actually did strike the water, it divided itself to the left and to the right. Then Elisha crossed over. When the guild prophets of Jericho saw him in the distance, they said, "The spirit of Eliyahu does rest on Elisha." Advancing to meet him, they prostrated themselves on the ground before him and said to him, "Here now, your servants include 50 strong men. Please let them go and look for your master, in the event that the spirit of Adonai has taken him up and set him down on a mountain or in some valley." He answered, "Don't send them." But they kept pressing him until finally, embarrassed, he said to send them. So they sent 50 men. For 3 days they searched, but they didn't find him. On returning to him where he was waiting in Jericho, he said to them, "I told you not to go, didn't I?" The men of the city said to Elisha, "My lord can see that this is a pleasant city to live in, but the water is bad, so that the ground is causing miscarriages. Bring me a new jug," he said, "and put salt in it." They brought it to him. He went out to the source of the water, threw salt on it, and said, "This is what Adonai says, I have healed this water. It will no longer cause death or miscarrying." The water was healed and has remained healed to this day, in keeping with Elisha's spoken word. Elisha left to go up to Bet-El. As he was on his way up to the road, some boys came out of the town and began making fun of him. "Go on up, Baldy! Go on up, Baldy!" He looked behind him, saw them, and put a curse on them in the name of Adonai, whereupon 2 female bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. He went on from there to Mount Carmel, and then returned to Shamron. Joram, the son of Achab, began to reign over Israel in Shamron during the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Yehuda. He ruled for 12 years. He did what was evil from Adonai's perspective, but he was not as bad as his father and mother, because he got rid of Baal's standing stone, which his father had made. Nevertheless, he clung to the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, with which he had led Israel into sin. He never turned away from them. Misha, king of Moab, was a sheep breeder, and he used to send the king of Israel wool 100,000 lambs and 100,000 rams as tribute. But after Achab died, the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. Jehoram left Shamron and mustered all Israel. He also went and sent this word to Jehoshaphat, king of Yehuda: "The men of Moab has rebelled against me. Will you join me in attacking Moab?" He answered, "My will join you in attack. I'm with you all the way. Think of my people and horses as yours. Which route should we take?" he added. "The road which the desert of Edom," answered Joram. So the king of Israel set out, along with the king of Yehudah and the king of Edom. After a roundabout journey of 7 days, there was no water for either army or the animals following them. "This is terrible," exclaimed the king of Israel. "Has Adonai called these 3 kings together only that they hand them over to Moab?" Jehoshaphat said, "Isn't there a prophet of Adonai here through whom we can consult Adonai?" One of the servants of the king of Israel answered, "Elisha, the son of Shaphat, is here, the one who used to pour water on Eliyahu's hands." Jehoshaphat said, "The word of Adonai is with him." So the king of Israel, Jehoshaphat, the king of Edom, went down to consult him. Elisha said to the king of Israel, "What do you and I have in common? Go consult your father's prophets and your mother's prophets." The king of Israel answered him, "No, because Adonai has called these 3 kings together to hand them over to Moab." Elisha said, "As Adonai Svaot lives, before whom I stand, if I didn't respect the fact that Jehoshaphat, king of Yehudah, is here, I wouldn't even look at your direction or take notice of you. But now, bring me a musician." As the musician played, the hand of Adonai fell on Elisha, and he said, "Adonai says to dig until this valley is full of trenches. For there is what Adonai says, you won't see wind, you won't see rain. Nevertheless, the valley will be filled with water, and you will drink, you and your cattle and your other animals." That's an easy thing to do from Adonai's perspective. He will also hand over Moab over to you. You will conquer every fortified city and every choice town. You will chop down every good tree and stop up every well and ruin every good field with stones. The next morning, around the time for making an offering, water came from the direction of Edom, and the countryside was filled with water. When all Moab heard that the king had come up to attack them, every man was summoned, from the youngest capable of bearing arms to the oldest ones, and stationed at the border. They arose early in the morning when the sun was shining on the water. Moab, when they saw the water at the distance looking as red as blood, said, "That's blood. Kings must have quarreled and their soldiers killed each other. Moab, to the plunder." When they arrived at the camp of Israel, Israel launched an attack, so that Moab fled before them, but they advanced on Moab and struck it. They made ruins of the city. Each man threw his stone on every good field, covering it. They stopped up all the wells. They chopped down all the good trees. Finally, all that remained was Kir Haset, behind its stone wall, with the slingers surrounding and attacking it. When the king of Moab saw that the fighting was too much for him, he took with him 700 men armed with swords and tried to break through the king of Edom, but they couldn't do it. Then he took his firstborn son, who was to have succeeded him as king, and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. Following this, such great anger came upon Israel that they left him and went back to their own land. The wife of one of the guild prophets complained to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, died." She said, "And you know that he feared Adonai? Now a creditor has come to take my 2 children as his slaves." Elisha asked her, "What should I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" She answered, "Your servant has nothing in the house but a flask of oil." Then he said, "Go and borrow containers from all your neighbors, empty containers. Don't borrow just a few. Then go in, shut the door, with you and your sons inside, and pour oil into all the containers. And as they are filled, put them aside." So she left him, shut the door, and herself and her sons. They brought her containers while she poured. When the containers were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another container." But he answered, "There isn't another container." Then the oil stopped flowing. She came and told the man of God, and he said, "Go, sell the oil, pay your debt, then you and your sons can live on what's left." One day Elisha visited Shunem, an well-to-do woman living there pressed him to stay and eat a meal. After this, whenever he came through, he stopped there for a meal. She said to her husband, "I can see that you are a holy man of God who keeps stopping at our place. Please, let's build a little room on the roof. We'll put a bed and a table for him, and stool and a candlestick. Then, whenever he comes to visit us, he can stay there." One day, Elisha came to visit there, and he went into the upper room to lie down. He said to Gehazi, his servant, "Call this Shunammite." He called her, and when she arrived, he said to her, "Tell her this. You have shown us so much hospitality. What can I do to show my appreciation? Do you want me to say anything to the king for you, or to the commander of the army?" She answered, I'm happy living as I do, among my own people." He said, "What then is to be done for her?" Gehazi answered, "There's one thing. She doesn't have a son, and her husband is old." Elisha said, "Call her." After he called her, she stood in the doorway. He said, "Next year, when the season comes around, you will be holding a son." "No, my lord," she answered. "Man of God, don't lie to your servant." But the woman conceived and gave birth to a son in the following year when the season came around, just as Elisha had said to her. When the child was old enough, he went out one day to be with his father, who was with the reapers. Suddenly he cried out to his father, My head hurts." He said to his servant, "Carry him back to his mother." He had taken him, brought him to his mother. He lay on her lap until noon, and then he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, shut the door on him, and went out. She called to her husband and said, "Please, send me one of the servants with a donkey. I must go to the man of God as fast as I can." "I'll come straight back," he asked. "Why are you going to him today? It isn't Rosh Chodesh, or is it Shabbat?" She said, "It's all right." Then she saddled the donkey and ordered her servant, "Drive as fast as you can. Don't slow down for me unless I say so." She set out and came to the man of God on Mount Carmel. When the man of God saw her in the distance, he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Look, here comes the Shunammite. Run now to meet her and ask her, 'Is everything all right with you, with your husband, with your child?'" She answered, "Everything is all right." But when she reached the man of God on the hill, she grabbed his feet. Gehazi came up and pushed her away, but the man of God said, "Leave her alone. She is in great distress, but Adonai has hidden from me what it is. He hasn't told me." Then she said, "Did I ask my Lord for a son? Didn't I say not to deceive me?" Then Elisha said to Gehazi, "Get dressed for action. Take my staff in your hand and be on your way. If you meet anyone, don't greet him. If anyone greets you, don't answer. And lay my staff on the child's face." The mother of the child said, "As Adonai lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." He got up and followed her. Gehazi went on ahead of them and laid his staff on the child's face. There was no sound or sight of life, so he went back to Elisha and told him, "The child didn't wake up." Then Elisha reached the house. There the child was, dead, laid on the bed. He went in, shut the door, and the two of them prayed to Adonai. Then he got up on the bed and lay on top of the child, putting his mouth on his mouth, his eyes on his eyes, his hands on his hands. As he stretched himself on the child, its flesh began to grow warm. Then he went down, walked around the house a while, went back up, and stretched himself out on the child again. The child sneezed 7 times, then opened his eyes. Elisha called Gehazi and said, "Call this Shunammite." So he called her, and when she came in to him, he said, "Pick up your son." She entered, fell at his feet, and prostrated himself on the floor, and she picked up her son and went out. Elisha went back to Gilgal. At the time, there was a famine in the land. The Gilead prophets were sitting before him, and he said to his servant, "Put the big pot on the fire and boil some soup for the prophets." One of them went out to the field to gather vegetables and came up to a wild vine from which he filled the front of his cloak with wild squash. On returning, he cut them up, put them in the stew. They didn't know what they were. Then they poured it out for the men to eat. But on tasting it, they cried, "Man of God, there's death in that pot." They couldn't eat it. But he said, "Bring some flour." He threw it in the pot, then said, "Pour it out for the people to eat. This time there's nothing harmful in the pot." The man came from Baal Shalisha, bringing the man of God 20 loaves of bread made from barley, first fruits, and fresh ears of grain in the sack. Elisha said, "Give this to the people to eat." His servant said, How am I to serve this to 100 men? But he said, "Give it to the people to eat, for Adonai says that they will eat and have some left over." So he served them, and they ate and had some left over, as Adonai had said.